I own 92 acres of ranch land outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. Then the HOA next door drove 312 steel posts into my northern pasture. Installed 1,800 of solar panels and told 126 homeowners the array would power their community for the next 25 years. The developer said an old utility easement gave him the right to build energy infrastructure anywhere inside a 60-foot corridor. What he left out was that the easement belonged to the regional electric company, not his HOA. And the utility had already warned him in writing that it would never energize a private solar plant built on my land without my permission. My name is Miguel Santos. I'm 62 years old, and I spent 34 years working for electric utilities across New Mexico. I started as a line worker. By the time I retired, I was supervising distribution construction and reviewing interconnection projects. I understand poles, transformers, easements, meters, substation, and the difference between installing equipment and having the legal right to turn it on. That last distinction became important. My grandparents purchased the Santos Ranch in 1957. The original property covered nearly 600 acres of dry grassland, piñon, juniper, and low volcanic ridges. Over the years, its parts were divided among relatives or sold. My father kept the 92 acres surrounding the adobe house, a metal equipment barn, 2 stock tanks, and the northern mesa. The land wasn't rich pasture. A good wet year could support 30 cattle. A dry year could barely support 15. We managed it carefully. I leased grazing rights to my cousin Elena and her husband. They rotated cattle between fenced sections and left the most fragile ground alone during drought. I also used the equipment barn to restore old utility trucks and tractors. The northern mesa was the flattest part of the ranch. It covered roughly 11 acres and rose about 40 feet above the house. It had full southern exposure, few trees, and direct access from an old service road. In other words, it was excellent land for solar panels. I knew that long before Gavin Mercer arrived. A 60-foot electric easement crossed the mesa from east to west. The easement had been recorded in 1986 when Rio Norte Electric Cooperative installed a distribution line serving several rural properties. It allowed Rio Norte to construct, inspect, repair, replace, and access its poles, wires, and related equipment. The easement did not transfer ownership of the ground. It did not give every person interested in electricity the right to build inside it. Only Rio Norte and its authorized contractors held those rights. Most of the original overhead line was relocated beside the county road in 2014. One inactive pole and an underground communication cable remained on the mesa. The easement stayed recorded in case Rio Norte needed future access. For decades, it caused no problem. Then the land east of my ranch was sold to Mercer Living Communities. The company proposed a 126 home development called Solara Ridge. The project included desert landscaping, a clubhouse, a pool, walking trails, and what Gavin described as a community microgrid. Each home would have efficient heating, smart controls, and rooftop solar panels. A larger ground-mounted solar array would supply the clubhouse, pumps, streetlights, and shared battery system. Residents would purchase power through a long-term energy services agreement managed by the HOA. The full energy contract was valued at approximately $14 million over 25 years. Gavin founded Mercer Living. He also served as president of the developer-controlled Solara Ridge HOA. He was 44, spoke quickly, and had the kind of confidence that made every question sound like an obstacle he had already solved. He visited my house in May 2023. He brought 2 engineers and a map showing an 8-acre solar array on the northern mesa. Gavin offered to lease the land for 25 years. The first offer was $18,000 annually with 2% increases. I declined. The rent wasn't unreasonable for ordinary vacant land, but the proposal included more than panels. Mercer wanted the right to install steel piles, underground cables, inverter pads, security fencing, access roads, drainage features, and a battery enclosure. The lease restricted grazing, construction, and vehicle access around the array. It also gave the HOA broad rights to enter the ranch at any time. After 25 years, I could be responsible for structures left behind if the energy company failed. I'd reviewed enough renewable energy leases during my utility career to know that removal language mattered more than opening promises. Gavin increased the offer to $27,000 a year and added a decommissioning bond. I still declined. The mesa sat near my equipment barn and was the only practical place to build a second workshop. My daughter, Sophia, planned to expand her mobile welding business there within several years. A solar lease would lock up the land until I was nearly 90. Gavin asked whether I opposed renewable energy. I pointed toward the photovoltaic panels on the roof of my house. I oppose leasing that pasture. He smiled. You're passing up nearly $1 million over the full term. I'm keeping 11 acres worth more to my family than your lease. He rolled up the map. I respect that. People often say they respect an answer when they've only decided not to argue about it yet. Solara Ridge received county approval later that year. The recorded site plan placed the community solar array on a 12-acre tract inside the development. That location was farther east, beyond a shallow arroyo. It required more grading and a longer underground line to the clubhouse. It also belonged to Mercer. I assumed the issue had ended. Construction started in February 2024. Road crews graded the main entrance. Builders poured foundations. Rio Norte installed new distribution lines and reviewed the development's microgrid interconnection. The first homes went under contract. I didn't interfere. Solara Ridge had a right to build on its property. In November, I traveled to Arizona for 3 weeks to help my sister after knee surgery. Elena continued checking the cattle. During the second week, she called and said trucks were using the northern service road. A crew supervisor had shown her a document labeled Utility Corridor Access Authorization. Elena assumed Rio Norte was replacing equipment. That sounded possible. The cooperative occasionally inspected the old communication route, and contractors didn't always notify me as early as they should. I called Rio Norte. The operations desk had no scheduled work on my ranch. I asked Elena to photograph the trucks. The first image showed a drilling rig, the second showed steel piles stacked on the mesa. The third showed a sign bearing the logo of Horizon Solar Construction. Rio Norte didn't use a Horizon Solar. Mercer did. I called Gavin. He said Solara Ridge was performing preliminary work within the existing utility corridor. What work? Foundation testing and cable planning. On my property, the energy corridor is already recorded for Rio Norte. Our council believes community generation qualifies as a related utility use. Your council is wrong. Gavin said he would send the legal analysis. He never did. I told him to stop all work until I returned. He said the crew would suspend activities outside the established corridor. That wasn't the same as stopping. I drove home the following morning. The trip took more than 7 hours. By the time I reached the ranch, Horizon had installed 84 steel piles. Each post was 6 inches wide and driven between 9 and 12 feet into the ground. Survey stakes extended across the northern mesa. A temporary gravel road cut through the pasture fence. 2 cattle guards had been installed without my permission. The construction superintendent was a man named Aaron Kim. He met me near the service road. Aaron was professional and immediately asked his crew to stop machinery while we spoke. He showed me the project file supplied by Mercer, the construction map labeled 3 acres of my ranch as the Santos Utility Solar Tract. A shaded 60-foot strip marked the Rio Norte easement, but the panel rows extended more than 300 feet beyond it, even if Gavin's easement theory had been correct. Most of the array sat outside the corridor, he claimed, gave him access. I asked Aaron whether Horizon had a ground lease. His file contained no lease. It contained a county solar permit, a utility interconnection application, and a letter signed by Gavin. The letter stated that Mercer controlled the construction site through recorded utility and access rights. I gave Aaron a copy of my deed and the actual easement. He called Horizon's legal department. The crew left the heavy equipment parked, but performed no additional work that afternoon. Aaron wasn't willing to drive more piles after the landowner disputed site control. Gavin arrived shortly before 5. He brought his project attorney, Meredith Sloan. Meredith argued that Rio Norte's easement permitted energy facilities serving nearby properties. I asked where the easement authorized Mercer or the HOA to use it. She pointed to language allowing Rio Norte's successors and assigns to operate related facilities. Did Rio Norte assign this easement to Mercer? She said the interconnection process created shared utility rights. It did not. Interconnection allows a generator to connect to a utility system after technical and legal requirements are satisfied. It doesn't transfer a cooperative's property easement to the generator. I asked for a recorded assignment. There wasn't one. Then I asked why the solar rows extended hundreds of feet beyond the easement. Meredith called that a site layout issue that could be corrected. 84 steel piles already stood in the ground. I told Gavin to remove them, restore the fence and road, and keep all contractors off my land. He said relocating the array would cost more than $2 million and delay the project past a state renewable energy incentive deadline. That's your schedule. It affects every Solara Ridge homeowner. They bought homes east of my property. They didn't buy my mesa. Gavin looked across the construction site. You aren't using this ground for anything except sparse grazing. That still makes it mine. We're talking about clean power for 126 families. Then build it on the 12 acres your plan approved. He said that location had drainage problems and required expensive grading. I reminded him those problems existed when he bought the land. Then Gavin gave me the sentence that explained his entire approach. An energy corridor is for energy. Miguel, you don't get to block public benefit infrastructure because you prefer looking at empty dirt. Solara Ridge wasn't a public utility. It had no power of eminent domain. It was a private development selling electricity through an HOA-controlled contract. The panels served a commercial arrangement. Calling it public benefit didn't give Gavin rights. Rio Norte didn't assign. I gave Mercer one reasonable opportunity. It had 10 business days to stop construction permanently, remove the piles under an approved restoration plan, repair the fencing and access road, and reimburse my survey and soil assessment costs. If Mercer complied, I wouldn't seek additional compensation for temporary loss of grazing or every unauthorized contractor entry. Gavin refused. The following morning, Horizon received a new authorization from Mercer ordering construction to resume. Aaron declined. Gavin replaced Horizon with a smaller subcontractor named Mesa Sun Installations. Mesa Sun arrived on Saturday. Its crew drove 37 additional piles before I reached the mesa. I called the sheriff's office. A deputy reviewed my deed, the easement, and the construction permit. He told the crew it had been notified of a land ownership dispute. The deputy couldn't interpret the easement or order permanent removal. That remained a civil issue. But the contractor risked trespass claims if it continued entering after receiving clear notice. Mesa Sun stopped. Gavin accused me of using law enforcement to interfere with a permitted energy project. The county permit didn't authorize work on land. Mercer didn't control. Permits confirm that proposed work meets certain codes. They don't grant ownership. I hired a surveyor named Janet Ruiz. Janet located the ranch boundary, the 60-foot Rio Norte corridor, and every installed pile. Her report confirmed 121 piles on my parcel. Only 19 sat inside the old utility easement. The remaining 102 stood outside it. The full proposed solar array occupied 3 acres of my ranch. Nothing had been built on Solara Ridge's approved 12-acre solar tract. I ordered a title examination. It found no lease, option, license, solar easement, access agreement, or assignment benefiting Mercer, Solara Ridge, or the HOA. Rio Norte still held the only utility easement. I contacted the cooperative's real estate department. A manager named Carla Dominguez reviewed the documents. She confirmed that Rio Norte had never assigned its easement and had never authorized Mercer to install private generation facilities on my ranch. More importantly, Carla found prior correspondence with Gavin. 6 months before construction, Mercer had asked whether Rio Norte would allow the HOA array inside the old corridor. Rio Norte responded in writing. The cooperative would consider allowing a cable crossing under a separate agreement. It would not authorize panel foundations, inverter equipment, fencing, roads, or private occupation of my property. The letter told Mercer to obtain a ground lease directly from me. Gavin had received that answer before making his second lease offer. He knew the utility corridor didn't give him site control. I sent Carla's letter, Janet's survey, and my title report to the county building department. The permit technician needed several days to review the file. The permit listed Mercer's development parcel as the project location. The approved drawing showed the array east of the arroyo. The field crew had installed piles more than 400 feet west of the permitted site. A county inspector visited 5 business days later. He photographed the piles, road, fencing, survey stakes, and parcel markers. The county issued a stop work order. The order applied to the community array, underground collection lines, inverter paths, and related grading. Mercer had 30 days to remove unapproved work or submit a corrected plan demonstrating legal site control. No solar construction could continue until then. Gavin told homeowners the project had been delayed by a technical parcel discrepancy. Then he held a press event beside the Solara Ridge clubhouse. He described the array as a model for affordable community energy and said one adjacent property owner was attempting to obstruct the transition to renewable power. He didn't use my name. He didn't need to. Local reporters found the permit file. One called and asked why I opposed clean energy. I don't. Then why stop the project? Because it's 6 acres inside my ranch. Mr. Mercer says the HOA has utility rights. Ask him for the document. The reporter did. Gavin provided the 1,986 Rio Norte easement. He didn't provide an assignment. The article published both positions without deciding who was right. That was fair. I had better evidence than a quote. Solara Ridge's financial schedule created the real pressure. The development had entered a 25-year energy services agreement with a company called SunGrid Community Power. SunGrid would finance part of the array, own certain equipment, and sell electricity to the HOA at a fixed rate. The project also qualified for state incentives and federal tax benefits if it reached specific construction and operational milestones. Mercer had certified that it controlled the solar site for at least 25 years. Based on that certification, SunGrid and a tax equity investor released $3.6 million for equipment, engineering, and construction. Hundreds of panels had already been delivered. 2 prefabricated inverter units sat in storage. A battery system worth $1.8 million was scheduled to arrive the following month. I hadn't signed a 25-year lease. I hadn't signed any lease. David Chen, the attorney who handled my father's estate, prepared factual notices for SunGrid, HOA Norte, the county, and Mercer's construction lender. Each notice included my deed, Janet's survey, Carla's letter, the stop work order, and photographs of the piles. Before sending them, we gave Gavin one final opportunity to relocate the project and restore the ranch. His attorney responded with a proposed settlement. Mercer would pay me $500,000 for a 25-year lease covering the 3 acres. The HOA would carry insurance, maintain the road, and remove the equipment at the end of the term. The payment was more than Gavin's original offer. It was also arriving after he had entered my property and driven 121 steel piles into it. Sophia and I reviewed the proposal. The array still occupied the only practical site for her future welding shop. The access rights still crossed our working pasture, and the lease allowed battery equipment close to the equipment barn. We declined. Gavin increased the offer to $750. Ling ling ling. I said no again. He told David that no rational landowner would reject that amount for 6 acres of dry grass. David's reply contained one sentence. A landowner's refusal to sell does not create an easement. The notices went out the next morning. SunGrid suspended all equipment deliveries within 48 hours. The tax equity investor froze future disbursements. Rio Norte placed the interconnection application on hold. The construction lender requested an independent site control review. Solara Ridge still had rooftop solar and ordinary utility service. No homes lost electricity. The clubhouse remained open. The only thing shut down was the private array Gavin had built on land he didn't control. Then SunGrid produced its due diligence file. It contained the Rio Norte easement, Mercer's legal opinion, and a site control certificate signed by Gavin. In that certificate, he stated that Mercer possessed sufficient rights to construct, operate, maintain, and remove the array for the full contract term. Attached to it was the email from Rio Norte refusing to authorize panel foundations and instructing Mercer to obtain a lease from me. Gavin hadn't hidden the utilities warning. He had submitted it. His legal opinion argued that Rio Norte's refusal didn't matter because the HOA's project qualified as a successor energy use under the original easement. SunGrid's attorney had flagged that conclusion and requested a recorded lease before final construction. Gavin promised the lease would be delivered before energization. Then he ordered installation anyway. The investment had been released because SunGrid believed site control was being finalized. Gavin believed completed panels would force me to sign. The county's stop work order arrived before he finished enough of the array to make that pressure work. But the 121 piles were only the beginning. When Janet compared the construction invoices with aerial photographs, she discovered that crews had already buried nearly 3 miles of electrical conduit beneath the mesa. The trench entered my land from Solara Ridge, crossed the old utility corridor, and ended beside 2 unfinished inverter pads. Gavin hadn't merely placed steel above my pasture. He had installed the entire underground collection system first, then covered it before I returned from Arizona. Removing the panels would not restore my ranch. The cables, concrete, roads, drainage cuts, and driven foundations extended 12 feet beneath it. And according to the engineering plans, the buried system had cost $7 million. Gavin had placed nearly $3 million underground because he assumed I would never make him dig it back up. Removing an underground solar collection system is not as simple as pulling wires from a pipe. The conduit crossed the mesa in 41 separate trenches. Some runs carried direct current cable from panel rows toward combiner boxes. Larger conduits connected the combiner locations to the unfinished inverter pads. A fiber optic control line had been installed beside them. None of the system had been energized. That reduced the immediate electrical danger, but it didn't eliminate the physical problem. The trenches crossed grazing land, shallow drainage channels, and the location Sophia had selected for her future workshop. Mercer's crews had cut through compacted soil layers, imported bedding material, installed warning tape, and covered everything before I returned. Removing the system carelessly could disturb more than 6 acres. Leaving it in place could interfere with foundations, utilities, fencing, and future excavation. I hired a civil engineer named Priya Nandakumar to map the underground work. She reviewed contractor records, ground-penetrating radar, trench photographs, and survey coordinates. The contractor's daily logs were detailed. That helped. They identified 860 feet of conduit, 27 junction boxes, 2 concrete inverter foundations, 3 drainage crossings, and 121 driven piles. The construction road covered another one. Priya estimated that complete removal and agricultural restoration would cost between $640, $000 and $910. Ling ling ling. That figure did not include damage to the solar equipment. Many piles could be reused after extraction. Most cable and conduit could be recovered. The concrete pads would have to be demolished. The soil would need decompaction, grading, reseeding, and at least 2 growing seasons of monitoring. Gavin's attorney said my estimate was intentionally excessive. He proposed abandoning the conduit underground and removing only equipment visible above the surface. That saved Mercer money. It left me with nearly 3 miles of private electrical infrastructure I had never requested. I declined. If the buried system remained, every future buyer, lender, contractor, and insurer dealing with my ranch would ask who owned it, whether it was active, and what rights came with it. Gavin had already used an old utility easement to justify one unauthorized project. I wasn't leaving a new network beneath my land for someone else to reinterpret 20 years later. The county's corrective notice gave Mercer 30 days to submit a removal or legalization plan. Legalization required my lease. Removal required engineering. Gavin filed a lawsuit on day 12. Mercer asked the court to declare that the Rio Norte easement permitted community generation and related equipment. It also claimed an implied license, based on my supposed awareness of construction. According to the complaint, Elena had allowed crews to enter, and I had waited while significant money was spent. Elena hadn't granted permission. A grazing tenant cannot give away the landowner's rights merely because a contractor shows her an official-looking letter. She called me as soon as the work looked unusual. I returned the next day. Horizon stopped after seeing my deed. The smaller subcontractor installed 37 additional piles only because Gavin ordered it back on a Saturday. There was no delay long enough to create consent. Mercer requested a temporary order allowing construction to resume while the case continued. The company argued that missing the incentive deadline would cause millions of dollars in losses. David responded that financial pressure created by Mercer's own construction schedule did not establish a property right. Rio Norte intervened for the limited purpose of protecting its easement. The cooperative's attorney told the court that Rio Norte had never assigned the corridor, never approved the array, and did not consider a private HOA generation plant a successor use. That mattered. Gavin's entire argument depended on expanding the easement beyond what its actual holders said it allowed. The hearing took place 19 days after Mercer filed the case. Gavin testified that modern electric systems were different from those contemplated in 1986. Distributed generation, batteries, and microgrids had changed the meaning of utility infrastructure. The judge asked whether technological change allowed Mercer to use someone else's easement without the holder's authorization. Gavin said the issue required a full trial. The judge agreed that the final interpretation could require more evidence. He still denied the temporary order. Mercer had not shown a likely right to occupy my ranch. Most of the proposed array sat outside the 60-foot corridor anyway. Even if Gavin eventually proved some limited cable right inside the easement, it wouldn't justify 102 piles, panel rows, invaltipets, fencing, roads, and drainage work across the rest of the mesa. Construction remained stopped. The court ordered Mercer not to enter the ranch except for county-approved inspection, safety, or restoration work. Gavin told Solera Ridge homeowners the ruling was preliminary. That was true. It also meant he couldn't install another panel. SunGrid sent Mercer a formal default notice. The energy services agreement required site control before full equipment delivery. Mercer had 30 business days to provide a recorded lease, an acceptable court order, or a replacement site. If it failed, SunGrid could terminate the agreement and seek reimbursement for development costs, storage, and equipment commitments. The tax equity investor issued a separate notice. The $3.6 million release had been based partly on Mercer's certification that site control would be completed before construction. The investor demanded updated financial security. Mercer had to place $2.2 million into a restricted account while the dispute remained unresolved. The construction lender also froze the portion of future home sale proceeds allocated to developer profit. No homeowner lost ordinary electric service. Rio Norte supplied every completed house through the normal grid. Rooftop panels continued operating under separate interconnection approvals. The clubhouse lights stayed on. The pool pumps worked. The shutdown affected the community array, battery system, and discounted power program Gavin had promised. That distinction became important when he began blaming me. Solera Ridge held a resident meeting inside the unfinished clubhouse ballroom. 83 homes had closed. Another 21 were under construction or contract. Mercer still controlled the HOA board because the declaration delayed homeowner control until 95 homes closed. Gavin stood beside a rendering of the solar field and said a neighboring rancher was using a technical title argument to demand an unreasonable payout. He did not mention offering me $750. Ling, ling, ling. He told residents relocating the array would cost $3 million and increase their future energy rates. A homeowner named Laura Bennett asked why Mercer hadn't used the approved 12-acre site. Gavin said new drainage analysis made that location unsuitable. Laura asked when Mercer discovered the problem. He said during final engineering, Priya had reviewed the county file. The drainage report identifying expensive grading on Mercer's land was dated 8 months before Gavin first approached me. He knew the approved site would cost more before he offered to lease the mesa. He knew it before claiming the Rio Norte easement gave him access. He knew it before certifying site control to SunGrid. Laura was a retired CPA. She asked whether HOA funds had paid for any work on my ranch. Gavin said the energy system was being financed through a combination of developer capital, SunGrid funding, tax investment, and community energy fees. That answer sounded complete. It wasn't specific. Laura requested invoices, bank statements, board approvals, and asset transfer documents. The developer-controlled board said those records would be provided after legal review. Residents formed an independent finance committee. They invited me to their next meeting. I attended with David and Carla from Rio Norte. I explained the ranch boundary, the original easement, and the missing lease. Carla explained that Solara Ridge could still interconnect a lawful system on its own property. Rio Norte wasn't opposed to the microgrid. It was opposed to energizing equipment located where the applicant had no rights. One homeowner asked whether I would lease the mesa if the HOA, rather than Mercer, became the tenant. I said no. The future welding shop and ranch operations still mattered, regardless of who signed the lease. Another asked whether I would allow the buried conduit to remain if it stayed inactive. Again, no. I wasn't angry with the residents, but innocent homeowners couldn't grant rights over my land any more than Gavin could. Laura thanked me for answering directly. Then she displayed the $750 000 lease offer Gavin had described as my demand. David had permission to share it because Mercer had included the proposal in its lawsuit filing. The offer came from Mercer, not me. Gavin had told residents I was demanding 3 times the land's agricultural value. In reality, he had increased the payment because relocating the array cost much more. The homeowner's attorney requested a complete accounting. Mercer continued resisting until SunGrid made the records part of its default review. The first invoice package contained more than 900 pages. It showed that Horizon Solar had billed $2.74 million for work associated with the Santos Mesa. Mercer had paid $1.9 million, using SunGrid and investor funds. Another $840,000 remained disputed after Horizon stopped work. Mesa Sun had submitted $226.0 additional charges for mobilization, weekend labor, pile installation, and materials. The array equipment in storage carried monthly costs of $48. Ling ling ling. The battery supplier charged another $31.000 each month after Mercer postponed delivery. Gavin's shortcut was costing nearly $80. 000 every 30 days before legal fees, interest, or restoration. Then Laura found something stranger. The HOA's balance sheet listed a $2.95 million asset called Community Solar Infrastructure Phase 1. The entry had been added 2 weeks before I discovered construction. A corresponding developer contribution and obligation appeared in the HOA records. Mercer had transferred the unfinished solar infrastructure to the Solara Ridge HOA. On paper, the HOA now owned the piles, conduits, foundations, and partially delivered equipment. Homeowners had never voted to accept the asset. The HOA had no lease for the land beneath it. The board meeting approving the transfer consisted of Gavin and 2 Mercer employees. The minutes described the system as substantially complete and located within the community energy tract. That description was false in 2 ways. The system wasn't substantially complete, and it wasn't inside Solara Ridge. The transfer explained why Gavin kept saying the dispute affected 126 families. He had placed the unauthorized infrastructure on the HOA's books before residents knew it existed. If Mercer failed, he intended the association to inherit the equipment, contracts, storage costs, restoration obligations, and lawsuit. Laura's committee calculated that the transfer could expose each completed household to more than $35. 0 potential costs. The homeowners demanded immediate reversal. Gavin refused. He said transferring amenities to the HOA was standard development practice. Laura agreed. Transferring a finished clubhouse on HOA land was standard. Transferring unfinished infrastructure buried on somebody else's ranch was not. The residents retained an attorney named Rebecca Cho. Rebecca sent Mercer a demand to rescind the asset transfer, indemnify the HOA, and preserve all solar project records. She also notified the HOA's directors and officers insurer. The insurer issued a reservation of rights letter and began investigating whether Gavin's board had breached its duties by accepting an encumbered asset without site control. SunGrid took the same position. Its agreement was with both Mercer and the HOA. The company refused to treat the asset transfer as a release of Mercer's obligations. Gavin could move costs onto an HOA spreadsheet. He couldn't move contractual liability without consent. Meanwhile, the county's 30-day deadline expired. Mercer submitted a legalization plan based on its pending easement lawsuit. The county rejected it. A lawsuit was not proof of current site control. The corrective order required physical removal unless I signed a lease or a court-granted rights. Neither had happened. Mercer received 45 days to submit a detailed removal plan. Daily fines would begin after that deadline. Gavin proposed leaving the conduit and piles in place while moving only the panels to Solara Ridge's approved tract. Priya explained why that didn't restore the ranch. The driven posts interfered with grazing and future foundations. The abandoned inverter pads occupied nearly half an acre. The underground network crossed the workshop site and altered drainage. The county agreed. Removal had to include all equipment outside, any right Mercer could prove. Rio Norte allowed some conduit crossing its corridor to remain only if it served a lawful off-site system under a new agreement. Mercer had no such system yet. The simplest solution was complete removal. Gavin requested another settlement meeting. His offer increased to $1 million for the 25-year lease. Sophia and I discussed it for 2 days. The amount could fund her welding business and improve the ranch. It also gave up the very site where she planned to build. We requested a design showing whether the array could leave a 2-acre workshop area, independent access, and a safe setback from the battery system. Mercer's engineer tried. The revised layout reduced generation capacity by 18% and complicated cable routing. SunGrid said the smaller project wouldn't meet the economics of the existing energy agreement. Gavin wanted the full 6. 3 acres. We declined again. He stared at me across the conference table. How much is enough? This isn't an auction. Every property has a price. Then buy one whose owner wants to sell. Gavin accused me of letting pride destroy an environmentally responsible project. I told him the environmentally responsible project was still drawn on 12 acres he owned. He ended the meeting. 3 days later, Mercer announced it would relocate the array east of the arroyo. The county location originally approved. The new design required a retaining system, improved drainage, longer utility trenching, and additional fire access. Estimated cost $4 million above Gavin's preferred Mesa design. SunGrid agreed to preserve the energy services contract if the replacement site obtained permits within 90 days. The investor extended its incentive deadline after Mercer provided additional security. For the first time, the project had a path forward that didn't cross my ranch. That should have ended the dispute. It didn't. Gavin still refused to accept responsibility for removing the system already underground. He told the HOA that because it owned Phase 1, the association should pay the restoration cost. The developer-controlled board scheduled a vote on a $9.800 special assessment for every completed home. The money would cover asset relocation, storage, legal expenses, and land restoration. Homeowners would be charged to remove equipment. Gavin had transferred to them without disclosure. Rebecca sought an emergency court order preventing the assessment until control of the HOA transferred, or an independent board reviewed the transaction. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Then Horizon Solar produced its internal correspondence under subpoena. The documents contained a construction sequencing memo written by Gavin. It instructed Horizon to install underground conduit and foundations on my ranch before erecting visible panel rows. One sentence explained the order. Complete subsurface scope first. Surface work can pause if Santos resists. But he won't finance excavation once the investment is buried. Gavin hadn't only assumed I would accept the panels. He had deliberately buried the expensive part first, because he believed I couldn't afford to make him remove it. When the homeowner's attorney presented that memo to the judge, the dispute stopped looking like a failed energy project. It looked like a plan to turn the cost of undoing a trespass into leverage against both me and the HOA. The judge temporarily blocked the assessment. SunGrid demanded Gavin's removal from all project decisions. The lender froze his remaining developer distributions, and Mercer's two investors called an emergency vote to decide whether he should continue managing the company at all. The steel piles were still in my pasture. The conduit was still underground, but Gavin's assumption had finally reversed. He thought the buried investment would make removal too expensive for me. Now, every day it remained, there was becoming too expensive for him. Mercer Living's investors removed Gavin as managing partner 4 days later. The vote didn't remove his ownership interest in the company, it removed his authority to sign contracts, directe construction, certify land rights, transfer assets, or represent Solara Ridge in the lawsuit. An independent manager, named Andrea Flores, took control of the development. Andrea had spent 20 years completing distressed residential projects. She didn't begin by defending Gavin. She began by asking what had to be corrected. Her first action was reversing the transfer of the unfinished solar infrastructure to the HOA. Mercer Living took the $2.95 million asset and every related obligation back onto its own books. The company agreed to indemnify the HOA against restoration claims, storage charges, contractor disputes, and liability arising from construction on my ranch. The proposed $9.800 assessment was withdrawn. Homeowners who had already reserved money for it kept their money. The HOA's insurer closed the most urgent part of its investigation but continued reviewing Gavin's conduct as a developer-appointed director. Andrea's second action was withdrawing Mercer's claim to a permanent solar right under the Rio Norte easement. The lawsuit ended with a recorded agreement stating that the 1,986 corridor belonged only to Rio Norte and its authorized successors or contractors, Mercer, SunGrid, and the Solara Ridge HOA possessed no independent right to occupy my property. Rio Norte retained its normal access for the inactive pole and communication cable. Nothing else survived. Andrea's third action was requesting a settlement meeting. She brought Priya's removal estimate, Horizon's construction records, a proposed restoration plan, and confirmation that Mercer had secured financing for the replacement array east of the arroyo. She didn't ask me to reconsider the lease. That saved time. Mercer agreed to remove all unauthorized solar infrastructure from my ranch. The company would reimburse my surveying, engineering, soil testing, legal costs, lost grazing income, and fence repairs. It would fund 2 growing seasons of restoration monitoring. It would also post a performance bond so the ranch wouldn't be left half-excavated if Mercer ran out of money. The proposed settlement totaled $1.08 million. Of that amount, approximately $812,000 was reserved for physical removal and land restoration. My professional expenses and documented business losses totaled $196. Ling ling ling. The remaining money covered contingencies, monitoring, and additional planting. If the first restoration failed, I didn't receive the construction reserve as a personal check. It stayed in escrow and paid invoices after Priya and the county confirmed each stage. That arrangement protected everyone. Mercer knew restoration funds wouldn't be used for unrelated improvements. I knew the company couldn't stop after removing the equipment it wanted to salvage. The settlement also required Mercer to dismiss all claims with prejudice and record a notice confirming that no solar lease had ever existed. David insisted on that final document. A future buyer shouldn't have to reconstruct the dispute from court files. We signed 43 days after Andrea took control. The county approved the removal plan 2 weeks later. The work began with a full utility locate. Priya's team mapped the solar conduit, the old Rio Norte corridor, the communication cable, and every junction box. Rio Norte sent an inspector to protect its remaining facilities. No excavation could occur within the cooperative's easement until the inspector verified the location. Horizon returned as the removal contractor. Aaron had stopped his crew when I challenged the site rights, preserved the construction records, and refused to resume without a lease. I trusted him more than any company Mercer could hire cheaply for demolition. The first stage involved recovering cable. Because the system had never been energized, the electrical conductors were safe after testing confirmed no outside connection. Crews opened the junction boxes, disconnected each run, and used controlled pulling equipment to remove cable from the conduit. More than 90% of the conductors could be reused at the new Solara Ridge site. SunGrid credited the salvaged material against Mercer's replacement costs. The fiber optic line came out next. Then crews excavated the conduit in sections. Priya rejected Gavin's original proposal to abandon it. Most of the plastic pipe remained intact and could be removed without destroying the entire trench line. Small excavators opened narrow sections while laborers exposed drainage crossings by hand. Where conduit ran through compacted ranch soil, crews removed imported bedding and replaced it with compatible material. The trenches were backfilled in lifts to reduce future settlement. Every section was photographed and mapped before it disappeared. The driven piles required different equipment. A hydraulic extractor pulled each post vertically. Most came out clean. 9 bent during extraction and had to be cut and removed in sections. The holes were filled with compacted native soil. Horizon recovered 109 of the 121 piles for reuse. 12 were too damaged. The 2 inverter pads were saw-cut into manageable pieces and lifted away. Workers removed the gravel beneath them, loosened the compacted base, and restored the original grade. Concrete from the pads went to an approved recycling facility. The temporary road and cattle guards came out last. Elena inspected every repaired fence line. She found one gate opening 2 inches wider than the original. The contractor adjusted it the following morning. That may sound overly precise. Cattle notice openings. So do landowners who have just spent a year explaining that details matter. Physical removal lasted 11 weeks. Restoration took longer. The mesa received less than 14 inches of rain in an average year. Disturbed soil couldn't simply be seeded and forgotten. A range specialist selected native grasses and drought-tolerant plants suited to the elevation. Crews scarified compacted areas, restored 3 shallow drainage paths, applied seed, and used biodegradable erosion protection on steeper sections. Temporary fencing kept cattle out during the first growing season. The initial rains were poor. Only 58% of the seeded area established successfully. The performance standard required 75% vegetation coverage relative to nearby undisturbed ground. Mercer paid for a second treatment. The following summer brought better monsoon storms. By the second inspection, coverage reached 82%. The county released the final portion of the performance bond. Priya conducted a subsurface survey after restoration. No Mercer conduit remained. No piles remained. The only utility infrastructure beneath the mesa belonged to Rio Norte and had existed before Solara Ridge. That clean survey became part of my property records. Sophia submitted plans for her welding shop the following spring. The building site occupied 7 acres near the eastern side of the mesa. The design included a 4-bay metal workshop, office, secure material yard, and a rooftop solar system sized for the business. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Gavin had accused us of opposing clean energy. Sophia's shop would produce much of its own electricity. The difference was that she owned the building, held the permits, and had my permission to use the land. Mercer's replacement array went through a separate process. The approved 12-acre tract east of the arroyo required more work than Gavin wanted to pay for. Engineers built drainage channels, a low retaining structure, and an all-weather access road. The panel layout was adjusted to avoid an erosion-sensitive slope. The underground connection to the clubhouse grew by nearly half a mile. The battery enclosure moved farther from the nearest home after the fire marshal reviewed the final design. The revised project cost $7 million more than the original mesa layout. SunGrid preserved the 25-year energy agreement, but changed several financial terms. Mercer contributed more capital. The tax equity investor reduced its participation after the missed milestone. Equipment storage, redesign, and delay added another $1 million. The community array became operational 14 months later than promised. It didn't provide every saving Gavin had advertised. The HOA's actual energy rate was approximately 9% higher than the first brochure estimated. It was still below the utility's standard commercial rate during the initial contract years. Residents received functional rooftop solar, a lawful community array, battery support, and ordinary Rio Norte service when the microgrid didn't produce enough. No one lost power because my mesa was restored. Laura Bennett became the first homeowner-elected HOA president after Solara Ridge reached the transition threshold. Her board hired an independent energy consultant to explain the contract in plain language. Residents could see what the array produced, what the battery stored, what SunGrid charged, and which obligations belonged to Mercer. The HOA also adopted a rule requiring a recorded lease deed or easement before accepting any infrastructure located outside its boundaries. The rule seemed obvious. It had cost millions of dollars to make it explicit. Mercer's investors completed the remaining homes under Andrea's management. Most buyers stayed. A few canceled during the uncertainty, but replacement buyers eventually purchased the houses. The development survived. Gavin's profit did not. The company's operating agreement allowed investors to offset losses caused by unauthorized acts against a managing partner's distributions. Gavin challenged that provision. The parties settled privately. The HOA's final transition report later disclosed that Gavin surrendered approximately $4 million in expected distributions and contributed $760,000 toward uninsured legal and restoration expenses. He retained a smaller ownership payout when the final homes sold. He wasn't left homeless. He was forced to carry part of the cost he had tried to place on me and the homeowners. The county assessed Mercer $216 in fines, inspection expenses, and corrective fees. The professional attorney who issued the easement opinion faced a separate complaint from Mercer's investors. The opinion had stretched the language of the Rio Norte easement far beyond ordinary utility practice, but Gavin had also ignored the opinion's own recommendation to obtain a direct lease before construction. The dispute ended through a confidential professional liability settlement. Horizon Solar recovered most of its unpaid invoices after crediting salvaged materials and accepting responsibility for failing to verify site control before trenching. Mesa Sun received payment only for work that could be documented and reusable materials returned. Its weekend mobilization claim was reduced substantially. The company had continued after receiving notice of the ownership dispute. Every participant carried the portion supported by the records. When everything was counted, Gavin's decision to build on my ranch created approximately $2 million in avoidable losses and restricted funds. That included removal, restoration, replacement site construction, equipment storage, financing changes, legal expenses, penalties, contractor claims, professional settlements, lost incentives, and delayed home sale proceeds. Some restricted funds were eventually released. Some salvaged equipment reduced the final loss. The direct permanent cost still exceeded $9 million. Gavin had tried to avoid roughly $2 million in grading and connection expenses by moving the array onto my flatter land. His shortcut cost more than 5 times what he hoped to save. He also lost control of Mercer Living, the Solara Ridge HOA, and the energy project. No one arrested him. This was a property, contract, permit, and fiduciary dispute. The consequences came through courts, investors, regulators, insurers, and the documents he had signed. That was enough. Gavin sold his remaining interest in Mercer Living 2 years later. I saw him only once after the settlement. He visited the ranch with Andrea to inspect the final restoration. He stood beside the place where the inverter pads had been. Native grass had begun covering the soil. The mesa still showed faint rectangular differences in vegetation where panel rows had been graded. Those would fade with time. Gavin looked toward Sophia's construction stakes. "You're really building the shop." That was always the plan. He said the solar lease would have paid more than the workshop land was worth. Maybe to you? He studied the view for a moment. "I thought once enough money was in the ground, you'd sign." "I know." He didn't apologize. He didn't need to explain himself again. The sequencing memo had done that. Andrea completed the inspection and left. Gavin followed her. That was the last time he entered the ranch. Sophia's workshop opened the next year. She hired 4 welders and 2 apprentices. The rooftop array supplied nearly 60% of the shop's annual electricity. A small battery kept essential equipment and office systems running during short outages. Rio Norte reviewed and approved the interconnection. Every cable sat where the permit said it would. Every contractor entered under a written agreement. Every panel belonged to someone with the right to install it. From the workshop yard, we could see Solara Ridge's community array across the arroyo. Thousands of panels turned sunlight into power on land Mercer owned. They worked just as well there. That was the part Gavin never wanted to admit. The renewable energy project wasn't impossible without my ranch. It was only more expensive. He treated that difference as permission. People sometimes assume progress gives them special rights. They call a private project green, essential, innovative, or good for the community, then act as though the label settles the boundary. It doesn't. A useful project can still be built in the wrong place. A clean energy system can still begin with dirty paperwork, and millions of dollars underground don't become an easement just because digging them up hurts. Gavin believed I wouldn't finance excavation once his investment was buried. He was right. I didn't pay to remove a single foot of it. He did.